right, we're going to talk about section 9.2, add and subtract sign numbers. What you see on the screen right now are number lines, and the blue lines are representing a counting or a positive motion. It doesn't matter where they start at, but you'll notice that, for example, the top one started at 0, and we moved 1, 2, 3, 4 units in the positive direction, meaning that this was a positive 4 or a plus 4 in the problem. This one starts at -3, which means we either went from 0 to -3, so we had a -3 in the problem, but we'll look at that in just a second. But from -3, whatever reason, we're starting at -3 and we go 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the positive direction. So this was a positive 4 in the problem. So both of these, even though they started in different places, they're both traveling towards the right. And remember that to the right is always a positive, and that's why we're using blue to represent the positive movement on these graphs. At the bottom, you see two number lines with red. This red arrow is telling us that we're moving in the negative direction. So for the first one, it looks like we started at 1 and we moved 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we moved 4 in the negative direction, which would have been -4 in a problem. This one, and maybe I just wrote these wrong because usually they're the same, but anyhow, this one will say we started at 3 then. So we started at +3 and we went 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, we went 4 in the negative direction. So we're just showing you that we can start at any place and move 4 either positive or negative on these examples. But if it's moving to the right, it's going to be a +4 in the problem. And if we're moving left, it would be a -4 or a -4 in the problem. All right, so we're going to now add or subtract numbers using a number line. So remember, if we're moving in the positive direction, we're going to use, blue to represent it. And notice that 2 is positive and 3 is positive. So we're having 2 arrows moving in the positive direction. We always start at 0 and we travel whatever the first one says. So we traveled 2 units to the right in the blue, and then from that 2, we keep our pencil right here on 2, and we move 3 units, 1, 2, and 3. So we stop at +5. So 2 + 3 is 5. This is how we're using number lines to help us add positive and negative numbers. So far, we've only added positive on this screen, but this one we're going to look at the positive and negatives. So here's our problem up here at the top, and notice that we're moving to the right 4 spaces, and then we're moving to the left 1 space. So we put our pencil on 0 to start counting, and we count 1, 2, 3, and 4. From right here is where we start counting, and now we're going back 1 space, and so this is why we counted 1 here, and we ended at a +3. So 4 plus a -1 is a +3. I guess I could have put that in blue to represent positive, but there you go. Okay, next problem. It's not very big. Let me make it bigger for you to see here. I have a -6 + 2. So that means we're starting, I should have started at 0. My thing's getting a little out of control here. I apologize. So I started at 0. We're roughly close to it here. Started at 0 and went -6 spaces and then to the left, which is negative. That's why I used red. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now I'm stopping right here. And now I'm counting 2 in the positive direction, which is to the right. So I went 1, 2 to the right, and that's where we stopped at -4. So -6 + 2 gives me -4. All right, this one has 2 negatives. So we're always starting at 0, and we're going to count -3 or 3 spaces in the negative direction. So 1, 2, and 3. Put my pencil here, and I count another 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That stops me at -8. All right, so we're not always going to have a number line. What do? Well, we're going to need to introduce a rule, and these rules for addition, okay, these are for addition problems. Notice there's a plus sign in both of these problems, so these rules are only for addition. There will be subtraction problems in just a minute. But for right now, we won't always have a number line, so how do we do these problems when we don't have a number line? Well, there's rules. The first one says if the signs are the same, meaning they are both either positive or negative in the problem, they're matching signs, we will add the numbers and keep the sign. So if they were already positive, we would keep them positive. If they're already negative, we would keep them negative. So for this example, the signs are both negative, so we're going to add them, and I get 16, and I'm going to keep the sign that they both have, and so it's negative 16. So if the signs are the same, add and keep the sign. Let me show you what that original problem looks like without all my mess here. Both were negative, right? And so I added them. 4 plus 12 is 16. Bring down the negative sign. The problem on the right is a new rule, and it says if the signs are different, subtract the numbers and take the sign of the bigger number. So for this one, when I look at this problem, I see a negative 6 and a positive 2. Signs are different. One's negative, one's positive. So I'm going to subtract 6 minus 2 and I get 4. So is 4 positive or negative? Well, I go back up here and I see which one's bigger, 6 or 2. 6 is bigger, 6 was negative, so negative 4. Let's try some more. Signs are the same. I'm going to add and keep the sign. What was the sign? The signs were both negative, so I have negative 30 as my answer. If the signs are the same, add and keep the sign. If the signs are different, we subtract. And so I have 21 minus 15, which is going to give me 6, I believe. And I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number. Well, 21's bigger, and the sign on 21 was negative, so this is a negative 6. Okay. Signs are the same. We're going to add and keep the sign. Keep the sign. The sign was negative, so it's going to be negative 57. Good. All right, so now not every problem is an addition problem. So here is a subtraction problem. This one, when we're dealing with sign numbers, you should always use this rule. And this rule says that we're going to change the problem to addition, and we're going to change the sign of the number that follows. So when we read from left to right, that means we're going to change the sign and change the number that follows. So what this looks like is I have 8 plus, and then if this was a positive, right, subtraction problem, I'm going to change the sign, and I'm going to make this a negative 11. Another way to look at this is the sign that's in the problem is going to go with that number, and you're just going to put a plus sign. So however you want to come about this, the subtraction sign needs to pair with the number that follows, or you need to just change the sign of it, okay? So now we treat this like it's an addition problem, which it is, and so we're going to follow the rules that we've been doing. Signs are now different, so I'm going to subtract, and I get 3. I take the sign of the bigger number. 11 is bigger. 11 was negative, so it's a negative 3 final answer. Okay. I'm going to change the sign, right? So my problem is negative 9 plus a negative 15. How can I put parentheses around there? Well, because it's not okay to put a plus minus side by side in a problem. We've got to separate them somehow, so that's why those parentheses end up in the problem, okay? They don't mean anything other than to separate that plus and minus sign right there, that plus and negative 15. All right, so I look at this problem and I have signs are the same. So I add and I keep the sign. And so I add and I get 24. They both were negative, so it's a negative 24 final answer. All right, it's a subtraction problem. We're going to change the sign, change the sign. This is the first time that the sign becomes a positive 7 rather than a negative, right? All the other ones were negatives when we changed them. So when I rewrite this problem, it's just negative 5 plus 7. Signs are different, so I subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. Well, 7 is bigger, so it's a positive 2 answer. All right, so I change the sign, and so I have 10 plus 16. Oh, sorry, gave you the answer there. 10 plus 6. This is like elementary school. 2 positive whole numbers added together, so I just add and keep the sign. So this is 16. Last one. I'm going to change the sign, so I have negative 25 plus 20. Signs are different, so I subtract the numbers and take the sign of the bigger number. Well, 25 was bigger, the sign was negative, so negative 5 is my answer.